Good afternoon and welcome to our fourth presentation celebrating National Science Week 2021. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Alex Callan and I work with the Conservation Science Research Group at the University of Newcastle. I would also like to introduce you to my colleague, Dr. Michelle Kelly from the School of Psychology at the University of Newcastle also. Together we are part of the Stream community, which has the objective of sharing science with the community in creative and engaging ways. We would like to acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal owners of the lands within our footprint. The Awabakal Nation, which is the land upon which I stand at present, the Darkinjung Nation, the Biripi, Worimi and Wanarua Nations, and the Eora Nation. We also pay respect to the wisdom of our elders past, present and emerging. I'm really excited for you to meet Dani Lloyd-Prichard today, and I'm grateful that she has agreed to share with us her wealth of knowledge around bees in Australia, especially bees in backyards as part of National Science Week. You may already know, or you may be about to learn, that bees are an incredibly important part of healthy functioning ecosystems. They're critical to our cropping systems because of their pollination process. They have an amazing social system. And we probably take for granted the sheer volume of work that it takes bees to actually create the liquid gold that we call honey. The honey that we use for much more than just sweetening our toast. Dani has a long history with beekeeping and honey harvesting in the local area in relation to research, biosecurity, training, and this is with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries as well as Newcastle University. She's also held president and other executive positions with the New South Wales and Hunter Valley Amateur Beekeepers Association. And I think what you'll see today in Dani's presentation is her absolute passion for sharing information about bees and their importance in our biodiversity and in the world. And she shares that to the community. She provides one-on-one guidance to help other amateur beekeepers care for their bees and collect and process their hive products. And she also helps provide guidance in the mandatory biosecurity inspections of hives, something that's really important in protecting our bees from diseases from other countries. Just a bit of admin for today's presentation. We're going to start the session with Dani's presentation, but if you have questions, can you please put them in the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. There'll be an opportunity for Dani to answer these questions at the end of the presentation. Alternately, if you have any comments, please use the chat function also at the bottom of the screen. And while we need to leave the subtitles on the presentation, I do acknowledge that sometimes they get a bit muddled. So if you don't want to see them, you can switch them off by clicking the closed captions in the menu at the bottom of your screen. All right, Dani, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me fine and you can see my screen. You're seeing a lovely image there of a bee going to a blossom, and there's me with some of my bees pulling out some frames. I'd just like to say welcome to National Science Week and welcome to this talk about bees and backyards. So hopefully over the next half an hour, I will give you enough inspiration that by the time you switch off this Zoom call, you're going to get outside, you're going to find a flower and you're going to start looking for bees. That's all I hope for. If that's all you take away from this talk is just an urge to go and find a bee, that's enough to start with. So let's get going. First thing, just get there we go. What makes a bee a bee? You don't need to type your answers in for this one. I'd just like you to think about it for a moment. And if I'd asked you to draw a sketch of a bee, the sorts of things you might think of putting, the morphology of the bee, what is it that distinguishes a bee from, say, a fly or a wasp? So you can see on this image here, we'll go through a few of those main features. The first thing is there's stripes, isn't there? We can see this stripy abdomen. So that large section at the back of the bee is called the abdomen. Then we're moving up a little bit further towards the head and you have this middle section. And attached to that middle section, it's called the thorax. You have 6 legs. You can count just to make sure if you like. And you actually have 2 sets of wings. So this is the powerhouse of the bee. It all happens at this thorax, this midsection, or the midsection of the body of the bee. And you can see there's a larger wing at the front of the bee, and there's a larger wing, sorry, and then attached to that is a smaller wing. So they do have two sets of wings. Flies only have one. So I'm giving you a little tip for the next slide. And then as we move up towards the head of the bee, you'll see it's got two antennas, which I'm wearing today to make sure that I come to you clearly without any interference. My little bee antennas, I always wear them when I give talks. And also you'll see some eyes. Have a close look at that image. How many eyes does a bee actually have? So you can see two big ones, which are two big compound eyes, but if you look closer between those two eyes towards the back of the head, there's three little dots. They're called ocelli, and they're actually three little eyes, and they help with the bee when it's measuring the light intensity, so it does help the bee quite a bit with direction and movement. So they have 5 eyes. That's pretty amazing. So there's our typical bee, and it's really representing a honeybee, the European honeybee there, but all bees have these features. And when I say all bees, we're talking not about just one species that you might see in your garden. We all hear about the honeybees, the ones that give us our honey that we put on our toast. But there are nearly 2,000 species of bees in Australia. That's 2,000 native bees in Australia. So this talk isn't going to focus just on the European honeybee. I want this talk to be about bees in general, and I want you to fall in love with Australia's native bees, as I have over the years when I've been watching them. So this slide now shows A, B, and C. There's 3 images. 2 of them are bees, 1 of them's not. Now, I don't need your answers typed again, but hopefully you've been thinking about the features we just discussed, and you're having a close look at these photos, and you can find something to do with the wings, maybe. We can see image C. Let's look at that one first, the bottom right-hand corner. That's a small native stingless bee. It's our native honeybees. And on the back legs, you can see there's some yellow balls. That tells us it's a honeybee. It tells us it's a female bee because she's actually collecting pollen that she's going to take back to the colony or back to her nest to feed the babies. So it's the female bees of all species that do all the work, that collect all the pollen, that collect the food, that forage out in our gardens to take back that food to their babies. So if you look at image A, that's very similar to the illustration we saw on the previous slide. That is actually a European honeybee. And you can see, if you look closely, what's happening on its head, what's sticking out of its mouth. Can you see it's got this mouth? It's actually got a proboscis. They call it a proboscis. It's like this bendable straw, and that's the bee's tongue. And they stick it right into the bottom of the flower to suck out the nectar. And that's what that bee's doing there. It hasn't come in at the top of the flower like the native bee has. It's gone in at the base of the flower and it's stabbed its tongue in to suck out that nectar. And the flowers that these bees are on are actually radish flowers. So I think I've told you the answer. Image B is not a bee. Image B is a hoverfly. And you will see stacks of them around right now in the Hunter region. The beginning of spring, the end of winter, we quite often see them before we see a lot of wasps and bees hovering and visiting our flowers. So they look very similar to a bee. They've got the stripes, but they don't fly like a bee. They've only got one set of wings. They're not as hairy as bees. So most bees have hairs all over their bodies, and that's what picks up the pollen at the flowers that they visit. So flies tend to be less hairy. It's also, its eyes are very different if you have a look at the bees. The eyes on the flies are much bigger and they're almost touching at the top, and its antenna is quite short. So there we go. Let's move on. What do you call a person who watches bees? This is just a little bit of fun. If you recognize that illustration as a Dr. Seuss illustration, you are correct. It comes from a book that was produced in 1973, and I don't have a copy of it, although I was born by then. It's called a bee watcher, of course. We have bird watchers, we have bee watchers. And that term came from his book, Did I Ever Tell You How Lucky You Are? And then it goes on to say, oh, the jobs people work out west near Horch Horch. There's a Horch Horcher bee watcher. His job is to watch. Then somebody said, our old bee watching man just isn't bee watching as hard as he can. He ought to be watched by another Horch Horcher. The thing that we need is a bee watcher, watcher. And it goes on, and there's bee watcher, 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 watchers, watchers, watching. And that's, I think it represents our everyday hierarchy in a lot of institutions that we work in, but we'll move on. In the meantime, if you like bees and you're looking at bees and you're watching bees, you're a bee watcher. What is the fear of bees called? Can you think? This is just warming you up. I'm just warming you up, thinking about bees, things you might have heard, things you might have seen. What is the fear of bees called? It's a good trivia question. Apiphobia, and I'm sorry if you suffer from apiphobia. This image is going to terrify you with all these honeybees. Hundreds of bees in that photo. Okay, what to look for. This is where we really get into the bees now. This is a beautiful poster produced by Gina Cranston, a local artist of Newcastle. She produced a lot of bee illustrations as part of her degree at the University of Newcastle, and now she shares her talent and love of bees around the world. And I think she's produced a poster for nearly every state and territory in Australia now. So did you realise we even had this many bees in New South Wales? And actually, this is only a fraction. What the bee taxonomists out of our museums are telling us is in the Hunter region alone, there's probably over 250 species. So that's amazing when you think, what am I going to see in my backyard? Just what lives in my community here? What bees do we actually have around us? These are the common ones. So Gina was lucky to spend time at the museum and actually draw these bees exactly as they appeared under the microscope. And you'll see the little black silhouette images next to those bees represents their real size in real life. And obviously on a screen like this, it's not the real size, or we'd be terrified of bees. But you can see they range from about 2 to 3 millimeters up to nearly 2.5 centimeters in size. So there's a lot of variety out there. Also look at the colors. Amazing collection of colours. Gina once described them as the jewels of our garden, the flying jewels, and I think she's right. Some of our bees are metallic. They actually glisten in the sun. Gorgeous. And of course, don't forget, you can quite often hear the bee approaching before you even see it. Those large bees, they're very noisy. Let's have a look at one now. This is one of my favourite. It's called the teddy bear bee, for obvious reasons. Doesn't it look cute? It's covered in fur, it's brown and fluffy and squishy and cuddly. And anyway, these are our native bees. They're probably one of the largest bee species around the Hunter region, and you will see them in your gardens. And these are ground nesting bees, which is really interesting. A lot of people have seen them nesting under their houses or on the banks of dams and creeks or anywhere where there's clay. Some people have like clay pizza ovens in their yards, and you'll see these bees will actually burrow little holes into the clay, and that's where they lay their eggs, and that's where their babies live. So teddy bear bees, just beautiful, and I've even seen them in my yard. They just knock the European honeybees out of the way. If they want to get to a flower, they go charging in and they toss them away. So no competition there. These guys win all the time. Let's have a look at some more. These photos here, the next few photos you'll see, were from a PhD student called James Dorey. And a lot of the photos were taken actually in his yard in Brisbane. And this is a blue-banded bee. And again, what you're looking at here is the incredible detail that he's managed to capture in this photograph. You can see the antennas, the eyes, look at that fur, look at that hair all over its bodies. You can see the 2 wings, you can see those stripes, and you can see the hint of the blue starting to show through. Beautiful bees, and they do exist in our area. And like the teddy bear bees, they also nest in clay and in the ground. They burrow and make these holes everywhere. And they'll nest in sort of congregations. So it's the female bee that does all the nesting. It's the female bee that does all the drilling and the digging and creates the nests that these bees go into. So she'll be busy. The boys kind of just hang around, and I'll show you a photo of the boys later. But you will see them together, and quite often there's the blue-banded bees with the teddy bear bees. They like the same sort of soil structure in the same area, and they're active around the same time as well, especially towards late summer and into autumn. I see a lot of them. And these are our buzz pollinators as well. So if you've got a vegetable garden and you grow eggplants and tomatoes, these bees love those flowers, and they shake the flower to release, or buzz the flower to release the pollen and collect it. and the pollen falls all over their body and they get covered in this cloud of pollen, and they take that back to their nest and just sort of brush it off and push it down into the nest to feed the eggs and the babies. They call it provisioning the nest. Okay, next one. This one, it's called a neon cuckoo bee. That's interesting. Why would you call a bee a cuckoo bee? Well, if you're a bird watcher and you've heard of cuckoo birds, you may be familiar with their behaviours. The cuckoo bird will lay its egg in another bird's nest so that it doesn't have to do any of that child rearing. Smart, sometimes. The cuckoo bee does the same thing, and it predates on the nest of the blue-banded bees. So you will see them together, which is quite interesting. So it will wait till the blue-banded bee, wait till she leaves her hole, leaves her nest to go off foraging for food, and she'll sneak in and she'll lay her egg on top of that nice little patty of pollen and nectar, and then she'll fly out. Job done. This one, I don't actually know the name of this bee. It's an unusual, very rare species, but what I wanted you to see is the capture. How did he capture this bee in flight? It's incredible talent of the photographer James Dory. But what this does show us nicely is, look at the 5 eyes. You can see them, can't you? See? Beautiful. Now have a look at this. These images were taken by James on one tree in his backyard over 3 days. He had 36 species of bees visit this one flowering tree in his backyard in Brisbane in October. And the tree that it was is a Melaleuca linearifolia. I probably spelt that wrong or said that wrong. Lineafolia. Anyway, it's a Melaleuca, paper bark. And we have them growing around here. They exist around the Hunter region. They are a lovely tree. They are a tree that they will get large. But look, if you could have 36 species of bees come to one tree in your garden and you had a fabulous camera, that's what you're going to plant. Oh, and just think of all the other pollinators that are going to visit it. If you've looked at paperbark trees when they're flowering, if you've walked underneath one, they smell like honey. You can shake the flowers. The nectar falls out. You can lick it off your hand. The bees, the birds, and all other pollinators go nuts for them. So they're a fabulous, fabulous bee tree. And just look at the beauty there that he captured. I love it. This is something that James put together just in case you're interested in seeing more of his photography. He does have a website, but he's also produced this beautiful photographic exploration of Australian native bees. I've seen it available through CSIRO Publishing, but you can also get them off his website. Just Google James Dory Bees Photography, you'll find him. Okay, in the day of lockdown, learning from home, homeschooling, how you feeling? All the mums and dads out there, a little bit tired, a little bit fed up. You've probably seen your children getting into a lot of online games or educational activities. This is Minecraft, where you can go in and create your worlds, and you can create bees and flowers and flower gardens, and you can create forest biomes. It's an amazing tool, but it's not real, okay? It's not real. It's all right to have a little bit of fun online, but I want you to get outside into your backyards, get into your gardens, look at a flower, find a bee. That's what you need to do. Get real. It's National Science Week and it's nearly spring. We have to get outside. So, look at the flowers. This is what you're going to see if you look closely. Coming into spring, into summer, our flowers are starting to burst open. Especially the citrus, they're budding up. They're going to pop any day. Bees go nuts for citrus flowers. Literally nuts. I'm going to tell you something. The nectar in citrus flowers contains caffeine. And the nectaries in the flowers, they release the nectar only in the morning and only till about 10 a.m. So you will hear a buzz of activity around those trees while they're releasing the nectar. So the bees go frantic for it. They're getting a caffeine hit, and the tree switches it off, takes the coffee cart away. No more caffeine. If you're working bees as a beekeeper with European bees, that's when you notice a little bit of change in the attitude. They get a little bit cranky when you take away their caffeine. But anyway, they're not going to attack you, right? Bees are not going to attack you. They defend their nests if they feel threatened. Most of our bees are solitary bees, okay? So of those 2,000 species of native bees, we only have 11 species, or 12 species actually, if we include the European honeybee. We have 11 species of native honeybees, which are stingless. and they can exist in little hives, and I'll show you a photo of them in a little while. The rest of our bees are solitary. So they've evolved from wasps. Our bees have actually evolved from ground nesting wasps. And where wasps remained eating meat, they're carnivorous, they're omnivores, they'll eat a bit of nectar and they'll go and predate on other insects to feed their babies. Our bees are vegetarian. Oh, so peaceful and beautiful. Okay, look at the flowers, see what you can see. Top 10 plants loved by native bees. This comes from a great website called Aussie Bees, aussiebee.com, and it was put together by a bee researcher named Dr. Anne Dolan, and she is famous for her work, her early work. Okay, she was one of the pioneering native bee scientists in Australia, and she has spent years with her partner travelling around Australia and documenting what the bees were visiting, and especially the stingless bees. She described the 11th species of our stingless bees as well. So a wealth of knowledge, and her website is fabulous and worth visiting. It's an encyclopedia of knowledge on our native plants and native bees. So there's a little list. I believe this is being recorded, so if you don't have a pen and paper and you can't write all this down right now, think natives, think flowers, think bottlebrush, think grevilleas, think eucalypts, any sort of gum, anything in the Myrtaceae family. Bees go crazy for it. They love them. And of course daisies and beautiful flowers. Here's some more pictures. So this was taken out at Cooranbong at a garden where I do actually keep a hive of European honeybees. And this is Stephen Marnie's photography. He's also a fabulous photographer of frogs and reptiles. Look up his Flickr site if you want some inspiration there. So he shared these with me, a nice mix of some native bees. You'll see one of them there on the bottom left-hand corner. It's got something in its mouth. There's something going on. It's actually blowing bubbles. It's not bubble gum. It's trophallaxis, they call it. So bees can blow bubbles with the nectar. And what they're trying to do is to reduce the amount of water in the nectar before they store it. So it's like dehydrating the nectar even further so it gets to that right consistency that they're happy with, that they know it's not going to ferment and go off in their little nest or in their hive. So they blow bubbles until they say, yeah, that's the right thickness, now I'll take it back. So see if you can see bees doing that. Got to have good eyes, don't you? Or a good camera. There's a few more. These are ones that my husband took in our backyard. So obviously there's stingless bees in the bottom half and European honeybees at the top. And again, they just love those radish flowers. Could look at bees all day. Borrowed this one off the internet. Fabulous sites there if you want to look at native bees. Lavender, purple. Purple is one of the colours that bees are really, really attracted to because their eyes can actually see more into that ultraviolet light range of the spectrum, more than we can. And so a lot of flowers will actually have these stripes, which are almost like a runway for the bees flying around. Us humans can't see it, but bees can. If you have one of those UV lights or a black light, and you walk around your flowers at night time and shine it, you might pick up some of those stripes. There's another little activity for you to do, a nighttime one. Most bees aren't active at night, so don't worry about disturbing bees or getting stung or anything like that. Here we go. So I said our bees have evolved from the wasps, which were ground nesting wasps. Over 70% of our bees are ground nesting bees. So we have nearly 2,000 species. Over 70% of them nest in the ground. And a lot of people realise that. You've probably never thought to look down and look at holes and go, oh, that must be a bee nest. Most of all, we'll be thinking spider, or we think wasp, ants. Next time, have a close look at those holes. You could be in luck. Could be a bee nesting there. And you can see this bee here actually, when it's bringing pollen back to its nest, it's the coloured yellow and the white. That's the pollen sticking to the hairs on the underside of its body. It doesn't pack them in its back legs like the honeybees do. It carries it back on the hairs on the scopa, which is this underbelly part of the bee. Amazing. Look at grass stalks and plant stems. Yes, that's right. This is what I want you to do at night time. So at night time, I was telling you that the bees, the boy bees, they don't build the nests and they don't stay in the nests. They just sort of hang out with their mates. They aggregate with other boy bees known as drones. And at night time, they roost. And these are pictures of roosting male bees. So we have on the left a group of their ground nesting bees. The females nest in the ground. and the males will hang out on a stem of grass. This was actually the Themida, so kangaroo grass. Yeah, so this was out western Lake Macquarie. We saw this and took a photo of it. And then you've got around Martindale, we took some other photos as well. So little sticks, little stems like fern stems, or dead twigs on trees like your tea trees. You might have some dead sticks at the end of the branches. Have a close look at them because the bees love to roost on them at night time. So usually they start to roost as the sun's going down, and all the bees will sort of hover around and fly together and then land. And they hold on to the stems with the mandibles. So they've got these little jaw parts like that, and they cling on, and that's how they sleep. Sometimes they don't even have their legs touching the branch. They're just literally hanging in the air by their mouth parts. So grass and plant stems. Here's some more. This was taken in Darwin recently, actually. They were very tiny. They were less than 4 millimeters long, these bees. And there were hundreds of them. We actually thought they were midges, a swarm of them, and we were initially doing this. And then we stopped doing that because don't swat bees, never swat bees. And we just stood back and watched, and then they started landing on this tree. And we went, oh my goodness, they're bees, quick, get the camera. As you do. Here they go. On the left, they're the blue-banded boy bees, just hanging out on a twig with their mates. And on the right, we have a megachile bee. It's actually a leaf-cutter bee. So you can see what it's doing. This one's not roosting. This one's actually chewing off a piece of leaf. And leaf-cutter bees will line their nest with leaves before they lay the eggs in it. And you do find them around here. Quite often if you have rose bushes, people complain, there's an insect eating my rose bushes, the leaves have these perfect circles in them. I'd say keep an eye on those leaves during the day. You may have a leaf-cutter bee around. And here we go, a few shots of my backyard. Actually, the bottom right photo, I have to admit, it's another photo of Stephen Marnie and his beautiful native garden. But that's my front yard on the left, and you can see there's that little yellow box on a post with a tin roof on it. That's a native beehive there. So that's a stingless beehive. And that's about a quarter of the size of the other hives you can see in the other picture. They're my honeybee hives out on my back slab in the backyard. So I can have them together. They live happily together. I've never seen any aggression between them. In fact, I've seen the native stingless bees walk inside the hive of my European honeybees and steal some stuff and then walk back out. A little bit cheeky. And the honeybees, European honeybees, just let them go. They weren't bothered by them at all. So you can have them together, but there's other things you can do. So it's lovely to have a native garden, I must say, because you get so many other pollinators coming in as well. So here's some other photos. These are the, on the right here, that's the community garden at Kooragang Island. If you haven't been out there to have a look, you can walk around it. It's just fabulous. They just plant so many varieties of flowers in amongst their vegetables, so they do that companion planting really well. And as a result, they bring in all sorts of pollinators, and it's a very productive garden because our bees are the pollinators that pollinate the flowers that produce the food, the fruits and vegetables. And flowering gums on the left here, you'll see there's both the stingless bees, if you look closely. You can see on the flower there's the tiny black stingless bees, and then you've got a European honeybee. So they will forage together. And here, this is another great activity for home, learning at home, or just something to do in your spare time. And if you're able to get out and go for a walk in the bushland and collect some lantana stems, you know, start reducing that weed out there a little bit. Take your secateurs with you when you go for a walk. You might see some bamboo you can cut up as well. These are artificial nests for solitary native bees, also known as bee hotels or insect hotels, because you don't just get native bees moving in, you will get solitary wasps, you will get spiders, you will get ants, and it's all good, okay? It's a diversity of insects that you want in your garden, and they love these little habitats that you can put around your garden. Really easy to make. Some of them, you know, it can just be a chunk of a branch, a nice thick piece, or it can be a chunk of untreated wood, so we make sure it's wood that hasn't had any chemicals put on it at all, and drill a selection of holes. So 4 millimeters, 6 millimeter, 8 millimeter size holes. Drill them in as far as you can. Try and get in at least 10 centimeters to start those nest holes off for the bees, and place them so that they're not in the full sun, I have mine actually about 1 metre off the ground is a good size. Bring them up where you can see them as well, and protect them from that hot westerly sun. So look for a place even on the southern side of your house, that's not too bad, or that northeast facing area of the house, and start putting some little bundles of hollow stem sticks, or make a little hotel. Look, did you see, sorry, I'll go back, did you see the gorgeous face there? We've got a resin bee flying into a hole, and you'll know you've got resin bees because they actually close up the entrance to their nest with resin. You can see brown, shiny, sticky resin. And the one in the middle here looking at us with the nice yellow stripes around its face, it's called a masked bee, and they're also known as cellophane bees because they close their nest off with a sticky substance that comes out of their mouth. They secrete it, and it's like cellophane. There's actually research going on into that exact substance in New Zealand now. They're looking at it as an option to plastic glad wrap. How cool is that? Science is so cool, and bees are awesome. All right, I'll keep going on about science and bees. Have another look before I change slides. Far left, you'll see there's this cute little house, and if you look closely, some of the holes have been closed off, and the ones that are a little bit white, sort of a grey colour, that's the cellophane bee, that's the masked bee that's closed it off. So they close it off at night time, and then in the morning they stick their head out, and it's like a curtain, and then they go flying off. So they come in and out of that curtain, and you can watch that. If you have one of these, bee hotels in your yard, you can watch this activity during the day. They don't care about you. As long as you don't go poking those holes with sticks or fingers, hang back and just watch. It's amazing. Here's a few more. This is a firetail resin bee here, top left, flying into one of those hollow bamboo stems. And then this bottom left-hand corner, these photos were taken by Tobias Smith. I should have said the previous photos were also taken from Tobias Smith, Dr. Tobias Smith. He's based in Queensland. He works at the University of Queensland, fabulous bee researcher, and he does a lot for education, and he runs Bee Aware Kids. And this photo, in the bottom left-hand corner, are tiny little reed bees. They're only 3 millimeters long, and they're inside a lantana stem. And they will nest in groups. So you will get more than, it's sort of semi-social bees. They're not like our native stingless honeybees. They're semi-social, and you could get like half a dozen females in the one little nest inside the lantana stem. So yeah, just think about that. A variety of sizes of hollowed stems. And there's some ideas for you, some designs. There's no rules here, except if you get it too big, you can't carry it. So just be careful. They do get heavy after a while, and it takes a lot of bamboo to fill up one of these little nest boxes. You'd be surprised. You think, oh, I've got 4 meters of bamboo. No, think 20 or 30 meters lengths of bamboo to fill one of these. It's amazing. Okay. And let's not forget the water. Bees do need water, and it's another spot to look for bees, especially on really hot days. You'll see particularly the European honeybees. They'll come in. They love swimming pools. We've all seen them in swimming pools. We've all seen them on the beach. They also like bird baths. They like dams, creeks, anything you can put in your backyard. If you've got little dishes that you can put some moss in and saturate it with water, that's perfect for bees because they won't drown in it. They can land on the moss, stick their little proboscis into that damp moss and suck up the liquid. So yeah, think of the bees and water, especially during our hot summers. And here's my second last slide. I just want to say, give all bees a chance. Really, really think about the bees and what you're doing in your backyard and what you can do to protect them. First thing is protect our native bushland. There's so many species of bees we haven't even discovered yet in Australia. We don't know the associations those bees have with our fauna. It's critical that we maintain and protect our bushland. So much to learn, and our bees really need our help. Our bees are like us at the moment. They've been attacked by viruses for years. We're being attacked by this terrible COVID virus. They're being attacked by things all the time, and we hear about colony collapse disorder. It's not just European honeybees, though. It's all bee species are at threat. It's pesticides. It's the chemicals. It's pathogens. It's diseases that impact on the bees as well. So let's look after them. Let's protect our native bushland. Let's plant bee forage plants in our garden. Always check, is it going to provide flowers throughout the year? Because the European honeybees and some of our large native bees, they forage all year round. So you do want to make sure you've got some flowers in every season. And particularly our native plants are perfect for that in Australia, obviously. But your gardens, don't forget your gardens. Let all those herbs and vegetables go to flower so the bees can visit them, pollinate those flowers, and you're going to get seed for next year. Okay? It's sustainable. Do it. Create bee habitats. You can all do it. You can all go and cut up some lantana from the bush, bring it back and make some little hotels for the bees. Get some bamboo. Get some raspberry canes, some grapevines. Even, the fennel, the weedy fennel that we see along the side of the road, as long as it hasn't been sprayed with chemicals, chop it up. It's beautiful, beautiful and hollow, and it'll last. Drill some holes into untreated timber, any scrap bits that you find around. Give it a go, see what turns up. No pesticides. And here, be connected. And by that I mean be connected to your neighbours, be connected to your bees, be connected to your local beekeepers. There's so much you can do. Be connected to nature. It's time to be. It's time to be bee watchers in your backyard. Enjoy. And you'll see I've got some little contact details at the bottom there. If you want to know more about bees, if you want to hear more about bees, I do have a podcast, and I've done this with my great bee buddy called Patrice Newell. Bottom left-hand corner, you can find it on any of those podcasting platforms. It's called Bee Therapy, and we'd love you to listen. Give us some feedback. We're going to keep recording anyway. We talk bees all the time, and nothing can stop us because we're bee mad, and we'll keep talking. But if you want to listen, please join. TimeToBee, that's what I do in my part-time. I'm here to help anyone that wants to get into bees, and I'd love to talk more to you about bees, so get in touch if you're interested. And thanks, everyone. I look forward to seeing photos, hearing about your bees. Enjoy the rest of your National Science Week. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Dani. That was such a fascinating presentation. I didn't know we had so many native bees in Australia, and I was fascinated to hear that you had both native and the European honeybees in your backyard alone, let alone one melaleuca tree having how many?
36 species he saw in 3 days.
Absolutely phenomenal. We do have a couple of questions though, so we might ask you these ones.
Okay.
It's a couple of questions from Rebecca. Are there any territorial bees?
Most bees are territorial in a way. They very rarely forage beyond sort of 500 metres from their nest. And in fact, there's a lot of research that's gone into our native stingless bees, and they've set up to 500 metres they'll forage, but they're actually finding most of them stay within that 100 to 200 metres from their nest. Yeah. And a lot of the other bees, if you saw them in your backyard, say you saw a blue-banded bee or a teddy bear bee, just think within that same range, The European honeybees will go a bit further. They can go kilometres from their hive.
So does that mean it's really important for us to have that, like you said, that year-long variety of flowering species? Because, some of our eucalypts might flower in summer, some of them might flower in winter, and the veggies, and we need all of that in one small space because they have such small foraging areas.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And that's the beauty of watching bees, and you start to think like a bee, and you start to think, what do bees need? Well, obviously they need flowers, right? So then you start tuning into what's going on in my environment, what's happening locally in my local bushland or in the gardens around me, what flowers in summer, winter, spring, autumn. You start to pay attention to what's going on around you, and you just start making little notes, create a little, nature diary, and start planting the things that you see that you like in your garden that provides some food for the bees. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Dani. Oh, we've got some more questions rolling in as well. But Rebecca also asked, how can we make the ground around our homes friendly for ground nesting bees? Are there any particular soils to avoid using in gardens or any soils that they love?
They do tend to love that sandy, like a clay soil, but with a bit of sand through it. So you can make your own clay blocks that some of those, like the blue-banded bees and teddy bear bees, can nest in. And there are some recipes on the internet, and there's also a great book. If you can see that, bring it back. Oh, hang on. No, it's gone backwards, isn't it? It's an ag guide on Australian native bees.
No,
That's got recipes in it. It's got beautiful photos. And yeah, so yes, you can create your own nesting blocks out of clay materials. They do tend to like more friable soils, so not the highly compacted clay. And you don't want to put weed mat down around your garden because they can't burrow down through weed mat, and not too thick with the mulch. So a lot of the native bee researchers will say, try and leave an area of your garden that's wild and some clear dirt and slightly mounded, because obviously they don't want to be nesting in flooding, sodden clay. So raise a mound up somewhere in your garden and just leave it and see what happens. Yeah. And avoid chemicals, obviously, if you don't want to have soils that have been saturated with fungicides or anything like that.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, and another one from Rebecca was, could you please provide a list of bee-friendly wood to make the nests out of? But I think maybe you've answered that. You talked about the fennel, the bamboo, the lantana,
Yeah.
and the blackberry canes, was it?
Yeah,
Or raspberry
blackberry,
canes?
raspberry canes,
Yeah.
grapevines, even agapanthus, even, some of the castor oil plants, and just a lot of the weeds do actually have hollow stems when you
Hollow.
look at them. Yeah, so hollow stems and a variety of sizes, and just sticks or branches. They don't have to be too round. You can get ones like that and just drill a single hole into it. Yeah.
Excellent. Jennifer asks, as she says, great program. Thanks, Dani. She says, do native bees suffer from disease like AFB that our European honeybees do?
Good question. Don't you hate when people see that? Excellent question. Usually means they're thinking and trying to come up with an answer. I don't want to mislead you, but what I will say is that they're finding that native bees have their own suite of pests and diseases. So they will have their own funguses and viruses and bacteria that affect them. I haven't heard of American foul brood infecting native bees, but it could. I'm just not up on the latest research around that.
Rebecca asks, how to get into beekeeping? Do you buy honeybees from someone and they move into the hives, or do you set up hives and attract bees? How does it work?
Do you want to be a European honey beekeeper, or do you want to be a stingless beekeeper, or do you want to just be a bee lover and put habitat for our solitary bees in your backyard? It depends on what type of bees you want to look after. If you're wanting to produce honey, obviously the European honeybee is the most obvious one because it exists in the whole range across Australia of climates. The stingless bees have a very limited range of where they can live, and you don't get a lot of honey out of them. If you want to become a European beekeeper, we could do a whole nother talk on that. You do need to be a registered beekeeper, and my advice is to join a local bee club and to learn from local beekeepers in your area. So learn about the bees and what they need, around your area, and join like a New South Wales Amateur Beekeeping Association club. There's lots of them. Yeah.
That's great. Karen actually just made a comment in the chat that she saw carpenter bees on a gonphalobium and on grevilleas, buxifolia and sericea last weekend.
Oh, you're lucky. The carpenter bees are fantastic. I didn't actually include a nice photo of them, but a friend of mine took beautiful photos of the metallic carpenter bee just last week, and he's in the northern beaches of Sydney, and it was this green metallic bee. It's about the size of the teddy bear bees. They're quite big. They're like 2 centimeters or a little bit more, and it's literally iridescent, and it was green, and it sparkles, and they love the grevilleas. So yeah, grevilleas are out flowering now, and the bees are going crazy for them, like they do for all flowers, but grevilleas at the moment, fantastic for bees. Yeah, good spotting.
Well, it's all happening because Rebecca also said that her sister has got about 10 outside the garden each morning. So
Lucky.
it's very exciting. Maybe that's that caffeine time that you were talking about.
Could be.
Sue asked if you could repeat the name of the book. Was it the Ag?
Yeah,
Guide?
it's an ag guide to Australian native bees. So the reason I'm putting it up is because I actually co-authored and compiled this for the New South Wales Department of Industry, and you can purchase it through Tocal Agricultural College, or DPI Publications if you just Google that. It's currently under review and being updated, so there'll be a new edition coming out soon, just with some slight changes to names, etc. But yeah, it is coming. Now there's another one, a really good one, on a bee-friendly planting guide. This is free. So the ag guide on Australian native bees is about $35. I mean, if you ever see me, you can ask me for a copy as well. I do have that. But this one, you buy off AgriFutures. You can buy it as a hard copy for about $60. It's called Bee Friendly, and it's by Mark Leach. Otherwise, they let you download it for free as a PDF. So it's a wonderful resource if you're just starting to get into beescaping your garden. It's for native bees and European honeybees, and it gives you a description of the timing of when things flower and an indicator of how good that flower is for the bees in terms of the nutrition that it provides through the pollen and the nectar. Fabulous one.
So it looks like there's actually quite a lot of resources out there,
Heaps of resources.
Dani, that you can get your hands on.
Yeah.
I think
Lots of Facebook groups, actually. I'm the administrator of the Australian Native Bee Network Facebook group, which is one of our first native bee Facebook groups in Australia. Just join it, I'll let you in.
Cool. So it was the Australian, I'm just going to put it in the chat.
It's Australian Native Bee Network, ANBN, Australian Native Bee Network. It's a Facebook group. My daughter's going to hate me because she's also an administrator and she'll have to approve everyone. She's on Facebook more than me.
It's just good to have so many places where you know you can go and find
It's
these
just the
resources.
start. I mean, there's so many amazing bee scientists out there, and most of them have their own Facebook groups and websites. And yeah, I encourage you to join them and join those groups. Some of them are more active than that one in terms of IDing bees. So there's a lot of taxonomists that are on Facebook group, and if you took a great photo and you couldn't quite work out what it was, post the photo and they'll point in the right direction or give you an ID. Yeah, it's good.
So Glana asked, do the bee hotels need to be under shade?
I wouldn't put them in that direct sun, from like that hot westerly sun of an afternoon. So part shade, morning sun would be best, and then shade in the afternoon.
Alrighty. I'm trying to think about where I can do that in my backyard right now.
A lot of people attach them to their houses and put them under the eaves or on their verandas.
Oh, okay.
Near the barbecue area, so you can watch the activity while you're cooking your snacks.
Rachel asks, and she says, great talk. Do you have any experience with free flow beehives?
I do, yes. So I think she's referring to the flow hive. Am I correct? Is she able to confirm?
Rachel, do you just want to say yes if that's right?
Flow hive? We're talking about the European beehive, the new Australian invention. Yes, I do. I was fortunate to be part of their testing team before it actually went live on their Kickstarter campaign, and I had a prototype for quite a few years, and I've worked with them in, fine-tuning that product. It does work. It's great if you've only got 1 or 2 hives. If you're in an area where you don't get honey that crystallizes, it works beautifully. But you still need to learn all about bees. So what I say to people is start out small. Don't jump straight into a flow hive. Get familiar with a beehive. Get familiar with a small, like they call it a nucleus colony. It's only about 4 or 5 frames of bees. Start there. Learn all the management skills that you need to become a really good beekeeper. That's touching on that biosecurity that Alex was talking about at the start. It's critical. It's so important you understand how to manage your hives before you go throwing another box on top, whether it be a flow hive or any other box to start collecting the honey. You can't just be a top box beekeeper or a honey flow super beekeeper. You have to be able to manage the entire hive. So there's a lot of time required and a lot of skills to learn, but it's so rewarding. And yes, the flow hive is a great invention. It's a great Australian invention. And it's really good for the backyarders if you want to go down that path. Always check with your local government authority, though, to ensure that you are allowed to keep bees in your backyard. And always check with your neighbours to make sure no one's anaphylactic. There's, like I said, that's a whole other talk that we could do another time. But yeah, they're a great invention.
So just on that then, Dani, Sue asks, is there anything you can do to minimise disease in bee hotels?
Yeah, you can. You probably should look at rotating the sticks and the stems every 2 years or so. It's kind of a practice that European honeybee keepers do as well. We like to make sure there's always fresh frames in that brood box where the queen's laying her eggs. And the same with a bee hotel. It's like you will get bees returning each season. So, the mother bee will lay the eggs, leave the babies, fly off, and she'll only live for 1 season. She'll die. When they hatch out, they're saying quite often they'll come back to the place that they hatched out of. And I've heard that's the same with frogs. Am I right, Alex? Like generally they return to the pond that they morphed out of. Bees are a little bit similar. And what a bee does is like it leaves a little sort of a shell of a cocoon, like a silk cocoon behind when the pupae emerges as an adult bee, and that will stay inside those holes in your bee hotels. So try and rotate them around every couple of years, put some fresh ones in for them, because over time you will get a build-up of fungus and other pathogens that we're not aware of yet, but they do exist. Yeah.
Okay. And Cassandra asks, are there any precautions with the bee hotels to take, like any cleaning or maintenance to prevent any disease transmission? I should have read that question before I just asked you, Dani,
Yeah,
because it's
pretty
very
similar.
to the last,
Yeah, similar
the
answer.
last question.
Just be careful if you do have to get your house sprayed for spiders or termites. Just make sure your bees aren't, those hotels aren't exposed to any of those pesticides or chemicals. Yeah.
Dani, I have one question. So we talked a lot about what the female bees do, and you talked about the boys hanging around. I'm curious about what the males actually do in bee systems.
Okay, they're very important. We do need the boys. We can't do without the boys. But let's face it, they're pretty lazy too. They really don't do the work of the female bees. They hang out and they wait to mate with the queen bees, with the female bees. And what they're finding is the first bees to hatch out at the start of the season from our bee hotels, from the ground, are the male bees, just like wasps. It's always the male wasps that emerge first. And that gives them time to build up strength, to mature enough to practice mating with flowers as well, I must say, so that by the time the virgin female bees emerge and start to fly around, the boys are ready and strong and they're able to grab hold of the female bees and mate with them, usually on the wing, on flight. With the European honeybees, the drones, the male bees, once they've mated with the queen bee, they die, but not so with the native bees. They can keep mating.
And how long is... so we're talking about the life cycle can be quite short for a bee, but how long is the period of being a baby bee or till sexual maturity?
It depends on the species, yes. I can't give you an exact number there. If you're talking about European bees, like they'll hatch out and they go through a whole series of jobs before they become a foraging bee. And obviously in the European honeybees, there's only one fertile bee, and that's the queen. She's the only one that can lay eggs. The other females are unfertile females, so they just become workers. I don't know with the native bee species just at what stage, like how many days after emergence or weeks after emergence they become sexually mature and can actually mate with the males. I imagine it's pretty soon after, because a lot of them have very short life cycles. You know, we're talking weeks to do all the work they need to do. Yeah,
it's an amazing amount of work, isn't it?
It is amazing. There's so much we don't know. Like we need more bee scientists. Okay.
How much effort does it take for a bee to produce, or a hive to produce like a small amount of honey? Like, are we talking hours and hours or days and days of effort? Or...
Yeah, so we're talking a typical hive of around 50,000 bees, if we're talking European honeybees here. They could fill a super of honey, which is like the top box you might see on those beehives that you see around the place. They could fill that in a couple of weeks, depending on what's flowering. If we had a really, really strong nectar flow of maybe eucalypts flowering, maybe spotted gums or something like that, and you've seen it around your area, that there's these gums that are just full of blossoms and the birds are going for it, and bees and butterflies and moths, and yeah, they could fill it within weeks. Fill it up, cap it, and that's 25, 30 kilos of honey.
So did we see any differences then in that drought period before the bushfires and then post-bushfire, when we had a lot of rainfall and lots of flowering?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, if we're talking about commercial beekeepers and recreational beekeepers, we're talking now about the European honeybees here that produce our honey. A lot of them were impacted by the fires. So a lot of them either lost their hives because they weren't able to get into their apiary sites and remove the bees before the fires hit. Others lost the sites that they would normally put their bees on, so they were just burnt to crisp, and there's nothing going to flower in those areas for 10 years now, until those trees grow back and mature. So yeah, and the drought, bees need water. So on a really hot day, a single beehive could take in like 4 litres of water just to keep the hive cool and maintain like an air conditioning effect through the hive. So yeah, they are impacted definitely by the climate. And what they're finding now is as temperatures rise, climate change is real. I will not deny it. It is real. And bees are feeling it, and the science is out. They're finding that the protein levels in the flowers it's decreasing as the temperature increases. So the quality of the food that our bees are eating, and that's from native forests as well as, agricultural, pastoral lands, weeds back up, like the pollen, the protein level is decreasing as temperatures increase. So the quality of the food is getting less. That has to impact on the bees. They need protein like we do to build all their strong muscles and produce. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dani. I think there is just one more question. How do you know what plant the pollen comes from in a hive? Can you know?
You can. Yes. There's another science. Actually, we've got an episode in bee therapy on this. I've done a bit of research in this field. It's called melissopalanology. So melisso stands for honey. Our European honeybees are called Apis mellifera. So melliferous, sweet honey. Melissopalanology. Palynology is the study of these microscopic spores. It's the melissopalanology is the study of pollen in honey. And so you can actually separate the pollen from honey samples and look at it under a microscope. It goes through this whole process, which is a little bit toxic and very, very long. But you can look under the microscope and they're like floating planets. Every species has distinct pollen shapes. So yes, you can, but if you're just in the backyard and you've got a beehive and you're watching the bees come in and going, what you're going to see is different coloured pollens, and that's what we want to see because that shows the bees are getting a variety in their diet of pollen sources, so a variety of protein. Protein contains the amino acids, which are those building blocks that the bees need for their babies to grow healthy, strong babies. So sometimes if you're studying the flowers and you're watching the bees, you can see what colour the pollen is that they're collecting off those flowers. So that can tell you. Otherwise, you've got to try and collect some of that pollen off the bees or collect it out of the honey. But yes, there is a way. It's not always as simple as it seems, though.
Thank you, Dani. And now I just have 2 more questions that have come through on the chat.
We can go for hours with bees.
It's great. Well, there's so much to learn. Jennifer asks, what colours are the best for blue-banded bees? I have a lot of purple flowers and I always find them on these plants.
Yeah, good choice. Yep, in that ultraviolet, that purple range, fantastic. Red flowers are generally known to be attracting for birds, but the bees will go to them because the flowers have a lot of different ways of attracting the pollinators to them. So sometimes it's through the shape of the flower, the color of the flower, sometimes it's through the taste of the nectar or the smell of the nectar. So, bees really do hone in on all these senses, and as a beekeeper or a bee watcher or a bee lover, you're going to find your senses are enlivened as well as you start to do this. You're going to start to notice those flowers and the colors that bees are visiting, and what is it, do you think, about that flower that attracts the bee? Have a look how long it takes the bee to sort of visit the flower and collect whatever it's collecting, whether it's pollen or nectar. The longer a bee stays on a flower generally tells you how good that flower is as a food source for the bees. The longer the better. Also look at how frantic the bees are visiting that flower. They're darting back and forth, coming back to that same plant. What else is flowering at the same time? Are there some plants they're not even visiting and others that they just love over the others? Again, it depends on your backyard, and this is what you're going to have to study, you bee watchers.
We've got just 1 minute left, but we've got more questions pouring in, so I'll ask some very questions. It's fantastic.
You just have to get me back.
There's been a few comments about that too, so we will.
Let's go live.
Great plan.
Face to face, out in the field. I'll bring some
let's
real
get
bees.
Let's get in the bush.
In the meantime, look what I've got. I'm playing with little puppets. This lockdown sending us crazy, hey? Even my pens, my antennas.
Anything to remind you. Lynn asks, is it true people feed their bees sugar water when they need food? And does this make a different kind of honey?
It is true that beekeepers sometimes need to feed sugar water or sugar syrup to their bees. Generally, it's when the hive is starving, or there's a risk that the hive will starve, or they're using that hive for a particular breeding purpose, like breeding queen bees. They want to make sure that there's enough sugar coming in at the right time to ensure that they will actually grow. If a beekeeper feeds too much sugar syrup to their hive, the bees can store it as honey, and that's why around the world, commercial beekeepers, when they deliver a batch of honey to a honey packer, their honey is always tested to make sure that it doesn't contain C4 sugars, which C4 sugars is where you get your sugarcane from. So it can. Most beekeepers, recreational beekeepers, it's not a problem. They're not feeding their bees heaps and heaps of sugar, because in urban areas, fortunately, we have a huge selection of flowers just about all year round. So the bees shouldn't ever be short of food. But if they are, yep, sometimes the sugar syrup can get that hive just through that dearth period, and then they can take off. They tend not to take it if they don't need it. So, the beekeeper may try and give them sugar syrup, and if they're on a strong flow of nectar and it's better than what the beekeeper's offered, they won't even touch it. So it's usually when they need it.
Excellent. During a period of lower flowering, is there anything you can do to attract or feed bees to help them? Like if there isn't any nectar or pollen available, would that go back to the sugar water you were just talking about?
Sugar syrup, never honey. So I think there was something going around last year where on Facebook someone had a little video and they put some honey out and all these bees were coming in and they're saying, yeah, we're feeding the bees, we're saving the bees. You're not. Do not feed bees honey ever. You risk spreading disease to those colonies. Honey can contain the spores of bacteria and funguses, so we never ever feed honey back to the hives. Sugar syrup if you must, and that's sometimes that's a nice activity to do. Just put a little bit of 1-to-1 sugar, white sugar that is, don't use brown sugar. If you mix brown or raw sugar or coconut sugar or rapadura sugar or maple syrup, like none of that's good for the bees. Keep it to the pure white sugar, the sucrose, and a 1-to-1 mix with boiled water. And you can put a little teaspoon out if you want. I mean, how often have we seen wasps and bees coming into cans of Coke and soft drinks? They are attracted to sugar. It's probably not the best for them in the long run, but they will find it if they need it, if it smells good. But never honey, please, never.
Very good to know. Okay, last question. There's a bunch of compliments and a please have Dani's back here, and I'll make sure you can see them afterwards. But thank you for everyone in the audience who's let us know that you really enjoyed Dani's presentation.
Yeah.
Last question is from Bernadette. Do native bees pollinate fruit trees as well as European bees?
They do. So at the moment, I was recently up in the Territory just a couple of months ago, and there's a lot of research going on with European honeybees and our native stingless bees. And they're looking at how effective they are as pollinators on mango crops and on rambutan, so those tropical fruits. And they're finding that the native bees are just, if not better, pollinators than the European honeybees. But there's things like almonds and apples and some of our European fruit trees that are 100% reliant on bee pollination, and they do much better with European honeybees because they tend to flower and grow in colder areas where our native bees aren't, or they're flowering at a time when our native bees aren't yet active. So there's a mix, but there is a lot of research. They're showing fabulous results with blueberries and stingless bees, avocados. It's a very exciting space, actually.
It's all happening, which is great, as it should be. All right, we might wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Dani, again, for coming on and talking to us about bees. And I can see how excited people are. There have been a couple of people who've said they're going outside after this.
Yes!
Just as you asked.
Woohoo! That's all I wanted.
To find their bees. And as we can hear from other people, they already know what's going on with their garden and their bees. So it's fantastic.
Right.
Just to let everyone else know, Michelle has posted in the chat our website, streamcommunity.com.au, which just has a list of upcoming talks. You can go in there and find out what's coming up next. We actually have Dr. Bernadette Drapt coming up during the week, and she'll be talking about the happy marriage of art and science. which is very much what we're about at the Stream community, using art to celebrate new research in science. We will be talking again about the aging brain later on in the week, and we have 2 new things to our program. On Friday and Saturday, we will have beginner drawing natural history workshops online, which is pretty fantastic. We have Gillian Hewitt from Imagine Naturalists, who would have been doing them face-to-face with primary schools. She's agreed to come on and give it a whirl in a Zoom environment. So we have a parents and children one happening on Friday at 3:30. That will be the first session. She'll teach you how to draw. You can go away and practice it and then meet her again in Zoom at 11 o'clock on the Saturday. I think it's 11, but just check that website. And then we have an adults natural history beginner drawing session at 2 o'clock, I think, on the Saturday, followed by the final wrap up and review on the Sunday. So please check out our website that Michelle's put in the chat if you're interested in any of those at all. Sorry, Michelle's just pointed out to me that this will be updated on the website on Monday. So I got a bit too excited because I know it's coming up and I'm keen to join, but it will be on the website on Monday. Thank you to everyone for joining us. It's a beautiful day out there if you're in Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, or the Maitland and the Lower Hunter. I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Everyone stay safe. Thanks again very much to Dani, and enjoy the rest of National Science Week. See you later.